Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Transit Responsibilities Review Public Information Meeting. Thank you for taking the time to participate today. I hope it will be informative. My name is Alicia Evans, and I am your third-party facilitator this evening. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. To help us have a productive meeting, here's a code of conduct that I'm hoping that we can all follow while we are together. We would like to ensure that this is a respectful and safe environment for everyone here in this room. That means we all need to be courteous, listen to and respect one another. It also means that we need to avoid distractions. So please don't do anything that would prevent others from hearing whoever is speaking. And in addition, if you could please silence your cell phones. You'll be provided with a lot of information today, and I'm sure many of you have questions about all things transit related. I will encourage you to keep the discussion focused on the topics at hand this evening, and when it is your turn to speak, please share what you think in a constructive manner. I hope this is something that we can all agree to, and I'll do my best to remind us as we go. Now, as we get started, let's have a better understanding of who we have in the room tonight. So with a show of hands, how many are transit users? And how many use transit multiple times a week? Once a week? Once a month? Rarely? Okay. Now, how many know how the province, city, and its transit agencies are organized to make decisions and fund transit in Toronto? Now, as many of you know, on February 12, 2019, the city signed an agreement with the province to talk about transit responsibilities in Toronto. In this, the city and province agreed on the need for meaningful public consultation, which was reinforced in March when City Council directed city staff to undertake an information campaign on the matter. A couple weeks ago, the City and TTC launched this public information campaign and consultation activities. You may have seen these ads on the transit system, which tell an important story about what's happening with transit in this city. So tonight is an opportunity for you to learn more about what's happening from City and TTC staff. Although provincial staff were invited to participate in this meeting, there are no staff in this room today. As such, please limit your questions to City and TTC staff. Tonight's agenda will unfold in three parts. First, we will hear from Scott Haskell, Manager of Project Development and Coordination with the TTC, and James Pertola, Director of Transit and Transportation Planning with the City of Toronto. The purpose of this City and TTC presentation is to provide you with information on the current status of several topics related to the transit review. Scott will give you some context on Toronto's transit system and its state of good repair needs over the next 15 years. And James will give you background information on transit planning in the city and walk us through recent changes made by the province via Bill 107. Following this presentation, I will open the floor to questions of City and TTC staff. There is a half an hour for this in the agenda, so please hold all of your comments and questions until then, as the presentation may help to answer some of them. Finally, after this, we will return to the open house area where you will have the opportunity to continue one-on-one conversations directly with City and TTC staff. There are many here to engage with you and answer your questions. Now, before I turn it over to Scott and James, I'll tell you about how you can provide your feedback. The City and TTC are conducting an online survey about the Transit Responsibilities Review. Please complete it if you haven't already. And today's Public Information Center is the last of 4 being held across the city. There is a comment form here for you tonight to get your feedback on this consultation and what else you would like to know about the review. So please also fill that out before you go, and I'll remind you of this at the end. So I'll now turn it over to Scott.
Thank you, Alicia. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see a good turnout. This is the fourth of 4 meetings, and by far this is the largest crowd we've had. I'm going to talk to you fairly briefly about your transit system, about our transit system at the TTC. As I think most of us know, because we saw the show of hands, we have a pretty extensive transit system. We only have 4 rapid transit lines, and I'm sure we all would like more. But fundamentally, we have a very rich and diverse network of transit across the city. It's a very integrated transit network. We carry a lot of people as well. It's essentially by ridership the third busiest transit agency in North America. In terms of total ridership in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, we carry more than 80% of the local transit ridership in that area. So the vast majority of transit trips in our region are taken on the TTC. The network is extensive, 150 bus routes, 10 streetcar routes. Most routes run all day, every day. We have a core of routes that run every 10 minutes or better all the time. It's a very integrated system in that essentially every route, as you know, connects with the subway or the rapid transit network. The vast majority of customers, when they use the TTC, make a transfer at some point in their journey, and many customers who use the TTC ride on the subway as part of their journey, but many also ride only on the bus or streetcar network. We're also quite integrated with the regional transit agencies. There's about 75 points in the City of Toronto where we make very close connections to GO Transit or My Way or York Region Transit or Brampton or Durham Region Transit. And so about 75 places where you can easily connect between those between two systems. And in fact, in several places, Mississauga or YRT buses come right into our subway stations, essentially just like a TTC bus. So the system is relatively integrated, it makes great connections. And that's the sort of nature that we've always been. The network is set up to be integrated. It assumes that people transfer between bus, streetcar, and subway. We see them all as one system. In terms of ridership, we carried 521 million trips last year, so 500 million trips each year on the TTC. And when I say a trip, that's a linked trip or a fare paid. So when I leave home, I get on the subway, I ride to Bloor Young, I transfer to the subway and ride up to my office. Although there's 2 legs in that trip, that's actually one trip. So that happened 521 million times last year. Our ridership had been increasing year over year since the late 2000s. We've leveled out in the last couple of years, but fundamentally, that's a lot of riders. That's more than anywhere else in North America except New York City and Mexico City. In order to move all of us and to run a big system, it costs a lot of money. Our operating costs in a year are about $2.1 billion. So that's the cost to run the service that we have today. That includes wages, that includes fuel, electricity, routine maintenance on vehicles, not long-term maintenance, but routine maintenance. And so the cost to run the service is about $2.1 billion in a year. And we bring in revenue of about $1.3 billion. And the vast majority of the revenue that comes into the TTC is fare revenue. It's the fares you pay. And that's a very high percentage in transit terms. In North America, that means we have about a 70% revenue cost ratio, and in North America, there are very few transit agencies that are that high. GO Transit is a bit higher, but it's different. It's a regional transit service. You won't really find a local transit service that has that high of a revenue cost ratio. The remainder of the difference then between the operating costs and the fare revenue is a subsidy, which comes from the city. And although it's only 30% or so, it actually adds up to $700 to $800 million. It's a fair chunk of change, and that's funding that the city provides to the TTC as part of the operating funding for the system. The majority of that subsidy from the city comes from property taxes, but the city also chooses to pass on about $92 billion a year that the city gets as gas tax money from the province. These are arrangements that have been in place for quite a long period of time. And it's sort of an agreed arrangement between the TTC and the city every year. We set the budget, we figure out how many people we need to carry, how much service we need to run, and then the subsidy is designed to let us carry out that task. We have a corporate plan at the TTC. It's our second corporate plan in the last 5 years, and it sets out sort of goals and objectives for the next 5 years. This was approved last year. There's a number of sort of key points in that. One of them is, seeking a path to financial sustainability or financial steadiness. We need to get there. We need to get to a point where we have agreed upon and budgetable funding arrangements. Another stream in that corporate plan is to move more people more reliably. We know we're a very service-oriented service, and that the transit customers in Toronto are highly receptive and perceptive about the quality of service. And so moving more people more reliably is a key part of our corporate plan. In addition to the corporate plan, earlier this year in January, our board and effectively later City Council approved a capital investment plan, which is a new thing for us. It's essentially a very detailed look at what investments are needed for long-term investment into the system. In other words, where we need to spend to keep the system running as it is and to improve it over the next 15 years. It's a very honest accounting of the costs that would be required to do that, the costs required to keep the service running. So we have a little video which is available on the web, but we'll show it to you now. It's about 5 minutes. It gives you a good little background into the capital investment plan. And then when we come back, we'll highlight a few things and then we'll move on to other topics.
Where you need to go.
It's fundamentally
Every day, you depend on transit to get to where you need to go.
it's fundamentally essential that we have good funding for public transportation.
It's the fastest way to get around because otherwise you're sitting in traffic for a million years, and why would anyone do that?
It's my way of living. I have to use the TTC all the time.
The TTC carries over 1.7 million people every weekday and accounts for 85% of all transit trips taken in the GTA. If we break down or slow down, it's frustrating. To keep you moving, we depend on investment from all levels of government. Over the last 10 years, that investment got a lot done. But as Toronto continues to grow, there's more to do. Toronto's population will continue to increase by approximately 40,000 people every year. We need to invest to keep transit moving. Take our busiest station, Bloor-Yonge. It's crowded now. Imagine it 10 years from now. We need approximately $1 billion to make this station bigger. Our busiest subway lines are going to have to carry thousands more people every hour. But part of our signal system dates back to the 1950s and 60s. Old signals can cause delays. We need to invest in signal upgrades if we want reliable subway service, and the trains on Line 2 will need to be replaced. There's a lot of work to be done on both Line 1 and Line 2. And we have to finish making all our stations accessible to those with disabilities. That's not optional. It's the law, and it's the right thing to do. Did you know that 70% of subway riders also use buses or streetcars for part of their trip? Buses like this one have traveled more than 1 million kilometers. 1 million. What would happen to your car with that many kilometers on it? Our new buses will be greener and more reliable. This streetcar car house was built in 1924. It's time to upgrade it and make room for more new streetcars. It's all connected. Stations and tracks are maintained and monitored 24 hours a day. Trains depend on signal systems, electric substations, storage, and maintenance yards. Stations include bus bays and streetcar lanes feeding customers seamlessly between modes. There are rails, cables, communications, cleaning, safety and security, fares, customer service, signage, thousands of parts working together as a whole. This isn't the sort of stuff that makes headlines. It's not a new subway line. But these are the nuts and bolts we have to take care of first for Toronto's transit system to work 5, 10, 15 years from now. It all adds up. And our current funding isn't enough. We need stable, predictable capital funding. About $2.2 billion a year for 15 years to maintain our current system and increase its capacity.
If you want the city to get moving, you got to invest.
More people are moving to Toronto, so we need to get it fixed as soon as possible.
It means accessibility, efficiency, great customer service.
And there should be funding to ensure that it works.
We need to invest in transit now. Let's make headway to keep transit moving. Read the plan at ttc.ca/headway.
So that gives you a very good overview of the capital investment plan, or the CIP. It's not exciting stuff in the terms of transit expansion. It's not ribbon-cutting things about building new lines. It's really a fundamental look into what needs to be invested in the system to keep what we have today operating. With only modest increases and improvements in capacity. It's really what's it take to make sure that the subway that we have today keeps running and carries a few more people. It's not about extending the subway. We have a backlog in deferred maintenance. We have identified, as you saw, $33.5 billion of maintenance that needs to be done in the next 15 years. And that is not optional stuff. That is things that absolutely have to be done to keep this system running. It's not a frill. It's not something to make it better or to make it shinier. It's really replacing like for like as things wear out, as things do in an old and aging system. We know we have increasing ridership, we have increasing development here in Toronto, we have an aging system, and all those things come together and pose a significant risk if we don't invest in the system to keep it up to date and to keep it operable and functional. You saw the mention of $33.5 billion. This graphic was in the plan. It was a very comprehensive look in the sense that it looked at all of our modes. As an integrated system, we're not just a subway, we're not just buses and streetcars, we're all of that, and all of the things that happen in the background to make those work as well. So the CIP identified the investments needed on subway lines to maintain track and to improve signals and keep tunnels dry, to buy new trains when old trains were out. But it also looked at our bus fleet. We need to buy 2,000 buses over the next 15 years. We actually don't have a bus order after 2021 on the books right now. And when buses age out at about 13 years, that means you really need to replace 1/13 of your fleet every year. That means a couple of hundred buses or more than 100 buses a year. And so that's an absolutely necessary investment. If we don't do that, we don't have the buses to run. We can't run as much service. It includes funds for Wheel-Trans. We're looking to buy about 800 Wheel-Trans buses over the next 15 years. That's both to replace the existing buses as they need to be retired, but also to increase the size of the fleet. It includes investments in stations as well, things like adding elevators and making the system more accessible, but also adding other things like power doors, making sure that the station continues to be functional, upgrading the public address system, which can always use upgrading, and also aspects of the station like that. It also includes funds to consider the installation of platform edge doors, which are the doors that you might see at an airport people mover or a European or Asian metro, which are doors that are along the edge of the platform. It's something we need to study, and so it's on the books as something that needs to be looked at. So the CIP looked at all of these things and identified what is necessary over the next 15 years to keep the system running. Keeping it running means moving people more reliably. That's one of the things in our corporate plan, recall. And so in order to actually get the best benefit out of our assets, you want to keep them in a state of good repair, but you also want to use them so you can move more people. Replacing an old signal system on the subway with a new signal system allows us to actually run more service. And so making these investments, while they also keep the system whole and operable and functional, in many cases also allow us to add capacity in a relatively modest way to move more people. Wholesale increases in capacity, that's part of the expansion file. That's separate from this. So the $33.5 billion is to maintain the existing system and also to increase capacity in a modest sort of way as sort of a side benefit of investing in and improving things with new technology. As mentioned in the video, $33.5 billion, but it's not all funded. Only about 30% of that total identified need in the next 15 years is actually matched up with committed funding from either the city or other funding agencies like the province or the federal government. And so the remaining 70% that's not funded, those aren't frills. Those are absolutely required things that are necessary to keep the system running. If we don't have the investment for those 70%, then we will have to run less bus service. We'll have to have more delays on the subway. We won't be able to move people like we want to move them. So it's not a frill. It's something that absolutely has to be funded. So overall, maintaining an existing system is about delivering what we're here to do, which is to move people. If we don't make that investment, then we are not able to do that. And resulting from that is a lack of all of the mobility benefits that we all know we get from a functioning and good transit system, and a continuing worsening of reliability, and really a push down on the potential ridership we could have. So the funding is essential and it's necessary. It's a comprehensive look at what we need to do, and although the number is big and scary, it's an honest number that really reflects the investments we need to make in our transit system. So that's a highlight of our CIP. The video is available online. We have copies of the actual report here. It's also viewable as a PDF on the web, and we can talk about any details afterwards if you want. I'm going to hand it over to James now, who's going to talk about some longer-term planning issues.
Thanks, Scott. So the planning for the city's transit system is guided by our official plan, which sets out the vision for how we want the City of Toronto to develop and grow. You may, if you've been involved in any of our transit public houses, seen the diagram on the left, your right, on that side of the screen, the 8 bubbles that talk about the objectives that we're trying to meet as we look to expand the transit system in the city. So you see that there's 3 major areas that we're trying to achieve: serving people, strengthening places, and supporting prosperity. How is it that we can provide people with more choice and opportunity to get around and to get around well? How can we deal with issues of social equity and providing greater access to more people to good rapid transit in the city? How can we build the kind of communities that we want to build through the expansion of the transit system, and have more complete communities around our transit stations? And then how do we help people get to jobs and schools and opportunities? How do we encourage the economy of the city through the development of the transit system? And also, as we're developing the transit system, look at how to make it as affordable as we can. The City of Toronto and the region, the Greater Toronto region, are growing at a significant rate. And you see from the map on the left just how much we expect to grow. Between now and 2041, we could see up to about another 1 million people coming into the City of Toronto itself. And I'm not speaking about the rest of the region. The growth in Toronto has been exceeding what has been expected or projected under the provincial growth plan. And the chart on the right is showing you the growth in employment in various parts of the city. You'll see in particular how significant employment in the downtown remains, and how much we expect that to grow over the next number of years. But we're also expecting growth in employment across the city. What we want to be able to do is connect those people who are living in the city and coming into the city with the jobs that we will find downtown and around the city. With this increased growth, there is no way that we could manage to move all of those people just through single occupant vehicles. We need to look at alternative ways of getting more people around efficiently. And that's why we need to build out the rapid transit network in the city, to serve more people and get more people to where they need to go in a more efficient manner. So there are many benefits to addressing or to investing in transit. Clearly there are economic impacts of congestion on our roads, but there are also impacts to people's lifestyles and to the environment. And we hope that through expanding the transit system, we're able to address some of those challenges. This, the table on the left gives you a sense of the importance of transit. Transit is also about supporting people's opportunity. It's about addressing social equity. And you can see that using transit is, or that transit use is very important in the downtown. A very significant portion of people use the transit system to get around downtown, and that's regardless of income level. But it's also a very significant thing for people's mobility as you move out into the other parts of the city. So over the last number of years, the city and TTC have been working on a plan and bringing forward recommendations to council to develop the transit network, to build it out so that there's a greater or more developed grid of rapid transit lines across the city in order to serve more parts of the city. So you may recognize this map. This has been through council a few times, and it includes a number of different projects, the Relief Line, both the South Central District or section of the Relief Line and the Relief Line North, an extension of the subway into Scarborough Centre, extensions to the Eglinton Crosstown LRT to the east and to the west, the Smart Track Stations program, waterfront transit improvements, and more recently we've added to this diagram the Young Bloor station improvements that Scott talked about in his presentation. The important thing that we're trying to do is to build out a network that provides people with more connections and opportunities to get around so that they can get to the various places that they need to go, and so that we have a resilient system that responds to all the different needs, and also that gives people options when there may be challenges in one part of the system or another. So there have been some changes recently, and that's why we're here. The province announced in its election platform and then in the budget that it intended to move forward with the upload of the TTC subway system. This is a diagram of all the various agencies that are involved in one way or another in the planning and delivery of transit across the region. Alicia asked that question at the beginning of people gathered here. How many of you understood who was involved and how they are involved in the delivery of transit in the region? It's a very complex system, and Scott was reluctant to put up his hand even though he's been with the TTC for many, many years. He knows this stuff inside and out, and even he isn't always confident that he fully understands how this works. But it does work, and we have built a system together that serves this region quite well. This builds on some of what Scott talked about as well. The funding sources that are available to the city are shown in the under City of Toronto. So our basic sources are development charges, property tax, and there may be some other sources like gas tax transfers and a few other kinds of fees that the city has available to it, but a very limited array of funding tools. The provincial and federal governments have a broader range of funding tools available to them in order to provide money for transit in the region. The key message, I think, in this slide, where we see some pretty large numbers on the right in terms of the money that's needed for just the operations of the TTC plus the state of good repair, capital improvements, and the expansion of up to $60 million. The key issue is sustainable and predictable funding. That's one of the things that we have struggled with as a region for some time and had many, many different discussions about over the years. In the provincial budget earlier this year, the province announced a new plan for transit in the City of Toronto and in the Greater Toronto region. And so this map on the slide illustrates the key projects. There are 4 main projects in the City of Toronto that were identified in the budget for immediate funding or immediate investment. Those are the extension of Line 2 into Scarborough with 3 stops, They include the Ontario line, which is very similar to the Relief line, but there are a few differences in that project. The Eglinton West LRT extension, but a decision, or the province has confirmed that they want to make that a tunneled section of the LRT, and then the Yonge subway extension up to Richmond Hill. So this map in many ways looks similar to the city's map. There are a few things that aren't on this map. The Eglinton East LRT extension, which is a significant project in Scarborough, is not on the map. The waterfront LRT is also not illustrated on the map, but those remain priorities for City Council and things that we will be working to advance. Another thing that was announced in the provincial budget is that following the extension of the Line 2 East into Scarborough, they will also look at extending the Shepherd subway further east to McCowan and Shepherd. But that's a little bit further down the line, and there's some uncertainty about the details of that expansion. So we're in the middle right now of working with the province, with Metrolinx and Infrastructure Ontario, to understand and assess these projects in order to be able to report to Council on how they meet the city's objectives. How do they compare to the city's projects, and what do we think about them? Do they address the transit needs as we see them for the city? And also, what do these projects do to, what's the impact these projects have on the city's other priorities? The one other project I didn't mention from this that isn't on this map is the Smart Track Stations program, which is also a city priority. And then following the budget, the province introduced Bill 107, the Getting Ontario Moving Act, and this allows the province to identify projects as sole responsibility projects, meaning that Metrolinx will have the lead and responsibility for planning those projects, and that the province will own those extensions. And those are the 4 projects that I mentioned that have been identified in the budget. There's also a provision in that legislation that would allow the province to name other projects where the city may be planning something, and we would be required to get provincial approval on the plan in some manner. The legislation also, and this has raised some questions with people, the legislation also provides for the province to take over the assets related to these lines, and indicates that could happen without compensation. There are many questions that we still have about what this legislation means, how that will play out, but we can answer some questions if you have on what we know so far. City Council, when we were reporting to City Council on the discussions that we were looking to engage in with the province about the upload, identified a number of key principles that are meant to guide the way in which we are to engage in the discussions with the province. These are key issues that the city wants to ensure are considered as we talk about the possibility of uploading the subway. And they include things like safety and security in the system. Very important principles that the TTC is concerned about, particularly if the TTC has to continue or is the operator of the system. It also includes questions around governance of the system and how decisions will be made, questions of funding, how we can still have a role in planning the transit system because of how important the transit system is to the city achieving its growth management objectives under the official plan. So these were identified and approved by Council. We are looking for any thoughts that you may have on these principles as well, and there is information about them up in the members' lounge at the back. So in terms of next steps, we are working, as I mentioned, working with Metrolinx to assess understand and assess the provincial plans so that we can report back to Council in the early fall about how we think the city should respond to these. In the provincial budget, the province is looking for investments from the federal government and the City of Toronto, as well as neighbouring municipalities on other projects, in order to fund the priority projects. We have made no commitments in terms of funding on those projects at this point. That is the whole purpose of our report back in the fall, in order to be able to let Council know what we have learned about the projects, how we think they would meet the city's objectives, and how we think that the city should participate or not in the development of those projects. This is still a process that we're going through. So that's the next big milestone on our timeline. There are obviously in the midst of this conversations continuing to happen at senior levels about the whole question of the upload and working through various questions and details of that. And there are opportunities for the public now, and will continue to be opportunities for you to be engaged in these discussions, in these processes as they go along. So with that, I'll turn it back to Alicia now to set up for the question period.
Okay, so before we get into the question and answer period, I'll quickly walk you through how this will flow. So if you have a comment or question, please raise your hand and a microphone will be brought over to you. Please use the mics, as there's a lot of people in the room tonight. And on that note, in order to hear from as many people as possible, I will ask you to keep your comments and questions succinct and to about 1 minute in length. And I will also ask staff to respond to your questions as succinctly as possible. After 30 minutes, I will be wrapping up the Q&A period so that there's still enough time for one-on-one discussions back in the open house with staff. So I also want to reiterate that this is a city and staff-led meeting, city and TTC staff-led meeting. So although there may be elected officials in the room tonight, the Q&A should be focused on staff. And if you would like to speak with your elected official during the open house portion of the meeting, you're welcome to do that. So we have Jade and Khatija with microphones. I don't see you. I'm going to trust that you're over there. So I'll start over with Jade here.
Considering the speed with which the province wants to move on their plans to upload the subway and implement their own designs, why is it taking until the fall to get the TTC's response sent to the city?
We are working through the details of the provincial plans, and in some cases there are aspects of the designs that they are still working through for us to understand and assess fully. We are also sharing with them information about the work that has been done on the Relief Line South, and in order for them to understand and determine what parts of that work might be transferable. And similarly, earlier work that was done on the Scarborough subway extension, when we were looking at 3 stops, we are working with Metrolinx to help them understand that, to see how it may how it might be dusted off or adjusted to apply there.
Yeah.
Hi there. I see the plan and all that. What I don't see is where are the TTC employees in this whole plan? Like where do they stand when it comes to the upload and and all these projects going on? No one's talking about that.
So that is a very important point to us at the TTC. I can tell you the TTC executive are very seized of that as well, and it's very important to them. Everything that the province has said in a public sense has been that they intend to upload the assets, so take ownership of the subway assets, but still have the TTC operate the service. Really, that's all we know at this point. The details of that are really needs to be discussed between the city, the TTC, and the province, and really those discussions are at a very early stage. There is, sort of as background to that, the plan for Eglinton Crosstown, Line 5 Eglinton, would also have a similar arrangement in that they would own that asset, but the TTC would operate the service. So perhaps they see that as a guide for how they intend to do the upload, but to be honest, we don't really know the full details of that yet.
Okay.
Thank you all. The TTC is a good system. It could be better. I appreciate that the honesty of the backlog report has come out. So if honesty is in vogue again, or somewhat in vogue, I wish we could be a bit more honest about the language of the upload and call it more theft or taking than an upload. And also, if we're running into such a shortfall of funds, it'd be really wonderful if we had the integrity and the honesty to say, hey, that Scarborough extension is, subway extension is not a good value for the billions. We need to spend money out there, but not the SSE. Any thoughts, please?
So yeah, we agree with the honesty point of view, and transparency in the city and TTC's opinion should be very much behind all of the upload discussions, and that's been a big point for city and TTC. When it comes to the actual projects, very clearly the province has taken control of deciding what projects to proceed with, and at this point we're working with them, as James said, to educate them on the work that we've done, to help and advise them on what they're doing. And in the end, we as TTC and city staff will decide, and we'll bring back to council, does this plan make sense, and should this be supported by council? We don't know the answer to that. We haven't done the work, but that is the goal this summer or fall of this process.
I'm almost inchoate in my anger and my anxiety about this entire proposal as a lifelong transit user in this city. I have particular concerns for, well, numerous, but two issues in particular. This seems to me to be completely a rogue operation in violation of existing legislation and existing division of labor between the various levels of government. Is the city doing anything on a legal level to try to assert its rights to retain its own property? Number one. Number two, that the protective legislation of the Planning Act, the Environmental Protection Act, and the Labor Relations Act be enforced and taken into account in this entire process. I can see nothing but instability coming from this, and bad service, and a service that's going to cost us more, and it's going to subsidize private owners. Okay. I'm really terrified about that. Profits that should go into the development of the system are going to go into private hands.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to James.
So you asked about legal recourse. I mean, we have city legal staff have looked at different pieces of legislation that have come out, but Bill 107 in particular, and it is within the way that it's structured. It is within the province's powers to enact that sort of legislation. But there are, in terms of, I guess I would point out that a couple things. One, the city continues to challenge the changes that were made to the size of council and some of the ways that the province has intervened there, and city council is still pursuing other means on that front to respond to the province. The other thing is that we're in a negotiation with the province about the upload. I don't know that we can assume what the outcome will be yet at this point. The city has been working to broaden it and to point out that there are questions or issues that need to be addressed around governance and roles and responsibility and funding first, that those are the primary issues we need to address before, or that we don't even need. I mean, council has said that they do not oppose, that they do not support the upload of the subway to the province.
Okay, Jade? Yes.
Thanks for the presentation. I had sort of a question that given that it will require a very tight cooperation between all the 3 levels of government to make something like this happen, what's the level of information sharing today that's happening between the city and the province? And is the absence of a provincial representative indicative of the kind of relationship that's existing in trying to make this work? Thanks.
In terms of the broader negotiations around the upload of the subway, we're in, I think, what could be characterized as an extensive information sharing phase, and have the province, you may have read in the media, has asked for quite a broad range of kinds of information from the city and the TTC, and we have been working to compile those things. Many of them are already public, but we have been working to compile them. We have also asked the province for information and are receiving that from them. I think it's a relatively open process. I can't comment on motivations or where exactly this will go, but there is, at the staff level, a very cooperative and open discussion about all of the various questions that we have to deal with in the upload.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I had a question for the upload. How will that affect accessibility on the TTC? Because the TTC even now is not very accessible. Today, even I had a very bad experience about accessibility, and I think that will just get left behind if the province takes over and controls the TTC, not the city.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm sorry to hear you had a bad experience today, and we should talk about that afterwards. I'd like to hear more about that. We fully expect that if the province is in the role of developing new rapid transit lines, that they would make them fully accessible. It's the law, but it's also what you would do. It's inconceivable they wouldn't do that. We have an extensive program to upgrade all of our stations to be accessible. We're more or less on track with that, to deliver that by 2025, and we have a budget to allow us to do that. And so we expect that if the province were to take responsibility, they would carry that out as well. We would be there to help deliver that or advise them if they want us to do that. And when it comes to vehicles, of course, every new vehicle we buy is accessible. There's always improvements in the next generations, but we would expect that to continue as well, no matter who purchases or owns the asset.
Okay. We have a question over here.
Yes, to what extent can the TTC work more closely and further with GO Transit and the other regional transit providers to show both the province and the public that the infrastructure asset ownership is not the important aspect at the end of the day, that it's the seamlessness of the customer experience and the quality of that that matters most in the end?
Yeah, we agree, absolutely. As an integrated system, we've always seen that we need to work very closely as a system, and we also want to work very closely with GO Transit, with our regional partners. There's always been work at the staff level to make good connections and make sure that the services connect. Metrolinx is planning to lead a fairly extensive service integration and even fare integration process, which is designed to see where there are benefits can be made by making services more aligned and where we can connect even better than we do now. And I'll point out that every GO station in Toronto has except one, has very, very good connections to the existing TTC network, which in most cases is more frequent than the GO service itself. And so we expect that to continue and to work on that. And really, no matter who owns the asset, we should think that as transit agencies, we work together as partners to do that sort of thing.
Okay, I hope this one's okay, but I'm not going to talk about the subways. I'm actually going to talk about the streetcars. When the current, well, they're behind, Bombardier's behind in the current purchase, but when it comes time to purchase new streetcars, I know that there's federal pressure to keep a Canadian company doing making these. And we see what Bombardier is not delivering, and then when they do deliver, they deliver something that is very subpar. So does the TTC have a plan to make sure they can get beyond the pressures of government to not sue the Bombardier for not delivering and maybe go with another vendor like Siemens?
So Bombardier is actually now on track with their deliveries. They are supposed to deliver all the new streetcars by the end of this year, and every indication we've seen so far is that they're going to meet that goal. You're absolutely right that they've been behind over the whole life of the contract, but the most recent agreement was to get the ball here by the end of this year, and well, we'll see if they can do that. We have identified the need. We're buying 204 streetcars. We've identified the need for at least another 60 to 100. In that CIP presentation, there is no money to buy new streetcars. So we need to buy new streetcars, but we don't have any money to do so. At this point, we expect we would go to the market, and we would put out tenders for them. There was an option on the present streetcars. I'm not sure the status of that, but we expect that we go to the option to the market, and realistically, that means we wouldn't get anything delivered for a number of years.
Okay. We have a question at the back.
Why do some people think there might be a problem with uploading public transit to the province?
I think one of the things that we realize is that there are different opinions about whether the upload is a good thing or a bad thing. If you go to the city's review questionnaire, we're interested in getting people's perspectives from many different angles. So we know that there are different views on the whole question, and what we're here, or the position that we are putting forward, is based on the position that City Council has taken, that City Council does not want to see the upload happen, and we have been instructed to engage in conversations to deal with questions around roles and responsibilities and planning and funding and governance of the system first, that those are really important, and that we can achieve a lot of the objectives that we want in terms of building out the network without necessarily dealing with an upload.
Khadija at the back on the right. Thank you.
I just came down to propose that we have public hearings. I mean, I would love to see 13 heads of the transit companies plus the Ontario government sitting right there. Everybody here deserves the truth about transit, and I think that would be a good way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Jade has a question on the left.
Okay, I remember when I think it was called the Terms of Reference, that document came out, and my impression from that was that the province had this idea that we could keep the fare box on the subway. And I thought, well, there's more revenue than that's generated by the subway. It's the advertising, the BAI contract, et cetera. So one of the things I'm wondering about, I'm puzzled what the logic, if any logic from the province has ever been presented about what the point is of ownership. Because my thought would be that if you are the owner, then you would be able to then set the budget because you're the owner. And therefore things like safety standards, how much maintenance there's done, whether or not there's a change in service frequency, et cetera, they set the budget, so they will tell us how much we will be able to spend. And then when looking at the possibility of uncertainty about what even revenues we're allowed to keep, this seems very murky to me. And as I say, I guess it ultimately comes down to, why are they interested in ownership unless it means they will determine the budget?
So one of the issues that's often presented, or justifications for ownership, has to do with the ability of the province to fund the system, and that if they own the asset, they can amortize their investment similar to a mortgage. So that's often presented as one of the key reasons for the upload. Not sure that that is absolutely necessary, but that was how in part how the Eglinton Crosstown arrangement came to be. Some of your other questions about what controls that would give them over budgets or costs, or the retention of revenues, different things like that. All of that is still subject to negotiation. That has not been determined. What the province may be wanting to do, I can't answer. but and they may have some ideas there. Certainly, the Premier has also talked about trying to move some of these projects faster. That's been part of the public message.
Another question at the back.
So listening to everything that's going on here, and there seems to be a lot of confusion and, or sorry, a lot of doubt about what's going on, how we're going to deliver transit in the city here. Everyone's questioning about how we're going to upload the subway, take over the assets. That's the province. Well, this government, this provincial government, cut the funding back in the 90s and left the TTC with a state of good repair of $40 billion in deficiencies right now on the subway line. There's a serious issue going on here, and there's no real answers from anyone, that this city carries 1.8 million riders, and there's no plan to continue that. So I don't know, where is there everybody from the province to answer these questions?
You're absolutely right. There's nobody here from the province to answer those questions. And we fully expect that we'll continue to operate an excellent transit system that carries all those people. How it all works out with the uploading is really subject to these negotiations, and we don't know the answers to that right now.
Question on the left here.
So we've talked about this before, but going back to Section 47, subsection 9 of the bill, which allows the Lieutenant Governor, by order in council, to overrule any act or legislation, which basically in layman's terms means that the provincial government, without passing a bill, can overrule any laws that they don't want to apply to an existing rapid transit line. Has the province said how they would apply this specifically to development on top or located on rapid transit project routes? And what would the effect be on the Planning Act potentially, or environmental assessments and other pieces of legislation?
So at the same time that the province introduced Bill 107, they introduced Bill 108, which makes a number of changes to planning and related pieces of legislation and to development charges and other powers or responsibilities of municipal governments. So that's one piece of an answer for you, that there are a number of things shifting in the world of land use planning in the province. We've had no indication from the province about how they might use that section that you're referring to in Bill 107. We are aware that they are gearing up in Metrolinx to undertake the environmental assessments or amendments or addendums to environmental assessments that will be necessary for the Ontario line and the Line 2 East extension into Scarborough. We are also aware and have had conversations with Metrolinx about what they're calling their market-driven approach, which started with new GO stations, where they're looking for third-party investors to help cover the costs of new stations and to develop transit-oriented development, some kind of development integrated in with the development of the stations. And we know that they are looking at the same approach for parts of the Ontario line and the Line 2 East extension. How that will play out and whether they will use these powers to exempt those developments from any municipal planning approvals, I can't speculate on. We have had assurances from Metrolinx staff that developers in Mimico, where they're doing something related to the Mimico GO station, would still require city planning approvals.
We have a question in the middle here, yes.
I'd like to get away just for a moment from uploading and talk about what I think are two practical matters. Number one, I'd like to know whether the King Street situation with no vehicular traffic is still a pilot project, or is it a done deal? That's my first question, and I might as well go on to the second. I'd like to know what was the reason for the Presto card going it alone when there were so many other alternatives that were already proven, and now apparently the Presto card is not so efficient either?
So two questions. First one, King Street. Just the other month, City Council approved what was the pilot project on King Street, and so it is no longer the King Street pilot, it is now the King Street Transit Zone, Priority Zone. And keep in mind that there's not no vehicular traffic on King, there's no through traffic at many intersections, but you can still drive to every block on King Street. Second question, Presto. About 9 years ago, the TTC was ready to go to the market to introduce an open payments electronic fare card system. And in the end, we did not do that, but rather were persuaded by the province to adopt the Presto card instead. We did need to modernize our fare collection system. We had a very old fare collection system. We made it hard for people to actually pay the fare in many modern ways. So it was necessary to modernize it. We had a plan which would be open payments using generally available credit cards, debit cards, that sort of thing. But we were directed or persuaded by the province to instead adopt Presto. And so that's where we are right now with Presto. Like any electronic system like that, it will continue to evolve. And I expect that the problems we have now will eventually get solved. And within a few years, I would fully expect we'd be into a next generation of electronic fare payment.
Okay, we are running short on time, so for the remaining questions, I'm going to ask you to try and keep to the topics at hand for the meeting tonight. Thank you. Oh, wait, we're over here.
Hello?
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sheila Paisiel, and I'm a member of TTC Riders. And hey, I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that I think a lot of people are here because our organization invited them here tonight. And before I ask staff a question, I have a question for the room. And it's how many people here think that Ford's plan to rip up our transit plans and take control of our system is going to be a complete disaster for public transit in Toronto? So if this is really a public consultation, I think you've seen the results. People are here because they're upset, they're confused, and so my real question for staff is, what is the city's position on the upload? And what is it going to take for them to fight back? I'll give you the answer. In December, City Council voted to keep Toronto's transit system in public hands, and this consultation was launched to advertise the city's position and to hold consultations about it. But if you walked in the room, you would have no idea that Ford has ripped up our plans, that Toronto City Council has voted to oppose it, that Ford has cut $1 billion from our public transit system, that Eglinton East is off the map, you mentioned that, sorry. You didn't mention that the Ontario line is at 2% design. So my question is, what is the city's real position, and what is it going to take for them to say this is a bad deal for Toronto?
So you are correct that City Council's position is that they don't support the upload, and you'll find that on a board up there in the discussion of the principles and of the position that the city has taken in this. At the same time, City Council authorized the city manager and the CEO of the TTC to engage in negotiations or conversations with the provincial, the special advisor on the subway upload from the province. And I think that was in recognition that we've got things like Bill 107, and the province had indicated it was going to act. We have been working to try to persuade the province that a full upload or even a partial upload may not be necessary, but as I pointed out, we were wanting the negotiations to look at issues of governance, roles and responsibilities, and stable funding in order to be able to achieve the same objectives without necessarily dealing with the upload. But I think the position that Council has also taken is that, and what the city manager has recommended to Council, is that given what's going on, we should be at the table to try to advance the city's interests in whatever the outcome may be. And I also noted that part of what we're doing is going through an assessment right now of this provincial plan in order to determine whether there are ways that it meets our objectives and whether we would recommend that Council put either municipal money or what we consider to be the municipal share of federal transit dollars on those projects, or whether we would put them into projects that are city priorities. And there's no guarantee at this point that we would be putting money into all of the projects that the province has identified. We need to work through that assessment and take that to Council.
Okay, thank you. We have a question over here.
Hi. So my next question will kind of be a follow-up on this one. I get it. I'm totally for negotiation and trying to persuade the province. But what if, just a hypothesis, what if we don't get to an agreement that seems technically the best option for the city and for the citizens? What are the next steps then? What is the power? What can we do as citizens, and what can the City of Toronto do? What are the legal resources in such case?
Maybe I'll start with what you can do. I think that answering or putting in comments on the sheets tonight, answering the survey that we have, talking to your councillors, which is always an option for you, talking to your MPPs. Those are all routes that you have to express your views and to raise concerns and questions of both the provincial government and the city government. In terms of what will happen and what might we do, I mean, we have over the last 6 months had, I don't think we've been at council monthly, but it's been pretty close to monthly. We've had about 4 reports in that period. As the conversations and as actions from the province and as the conversations have been progressing, we have been keeping council informed of those. And that's a commitment that the city manager has made, that as these negotiations unfold, we will continue to keep council informed so that if there's anything that happens that we think is not in, that's somehow going against the interests of the city, or of our residents, that we would go to council with that information and look for direction on how they want us to act, or to make recommendations. I mean, council has asked for legal advice on various questions related to the different things that have been happening with the new provincial government, and that may happen again. That legal needs to advise council on other aspects of provincial action or legislation. There's a lot that. I mean, there's a lot of speculation, and I don't know exactly how this will all unfold.
Okay, we're just at 30 minutes now, so I'm going to take one question from Jade's mic and one more question from Khadijah's mic before we wrap up.
Hi, thank you for inviting us tonight. I think it's clear everyone here is passionate about our transit. It's much appreciated. I'd like to talk about some of the numbers that Mr. Haskell pointed out earlier in the meeting. And I found it very concerning that only 30% of the required funding over the next 15 years is available as to what was outlined in the plan. Mr. Haskell said there's $2.2 billion each year over the next 15 years. That means there's only $10 billion available. And if Line 1 needs $9 billion, and Line 2 needs $9 billion as well, that clearly doesn't add up. So how can we guarantee the maintenance of the current rapid transit in the city, and also look to plan for future development?
Thank you.
Yeah, yes, very good questions. How can we guarantee the maintenance? We can guarantee the maintenance by firstly knowing what we have to maintain and having an inventory of what we need to maintain, and then having good project controls and being able to know what to do, how to deliver that project, and to make sure that what we deliver is the right thing to deliver. When it comes to actually doing the work and funding it, we only have a limited amount of funding now, so that's allocated to the highest priority projects as they exist. It's also often very project-based, and so in some cases there's projects that are funded. They will come to an end, and we will then need to seek funding. Fundamentally, though, the CIP was all about identifying those needs and using that as a starting point to talk with our senior levels of government and our funding partners as to what needs to be done and what needs to be funded. And if we don't have a plan like that, then we can't really start that conversation. And really it's designed to set us out to that path to fiscal sort of sustainability or predictability, so that we can identify and seek the funding that we need to do this over the long term.
Okay, we have one last question over.
Just add to that,
okay,
Alicia.
yep.
I mean, part of the reason that it hasn't been funded, a lot of federal and provincial money comes through programs. And so we've had a federal program, and we're in the second phase, the second generation of a federal funding program right now related to capital expansion in transit. But part of what the city has been doing, and I think this is where the 15-year plan is, the State of Good Repair, the capital investment plan is really helpful, is pushing both the province and the federal government that we need a better and more stable approach to this, and not just a series of programs every few years. We need something that we can count on and that we can plan with in mind. And that's a big priority for the city.
Okay, so last question, yes.
Aleem Thorani, ATU Local 113, and proud member of TTC Riders. Just quickly, I know in the 1920s, I believe the province downloaded the TTC to the municipality, and I believe Metrolinx has been around since 2006, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? Why would I take advice from my 13-year-old son or daughter about what we should be doing with our transit system when the TTC has been doing it for 120 years? Not just operating, maintaining, financing. The question's pretty simple. I don't think the province has any business being part of our transit system. And why are they only trying to take over the subway, which generates all the revenue, and not the entire system, the buses, the streetcars? I think it's just stealing the profits. That's my honest opinion.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your comment. So on behalf of the City and TTC, I would like to thank you for your participation this evening. Please remember that this is not the end of the conversation. The open house is still open for a period of time, so if you would like to continue your conversations with staff, you're welcome to do so. Also, the City and TTC would like to get your feedback, so please fill out a comment form before you leave tonight and share your feedback through the online survey if you haven't already done so, which is at www.toronto.ca/transit review. And if you have any further questions or comments along the way, or would like to stay up to date as the project, as this discussion progresses, you can join the distribution list at the front desk, email or call, or visit the website at any time. Thank you very much.